Have you noticed? Those who want to progress the most often end up being the ones who are the most attached to their knowledge. Yet, wanting to progress and accepting to deconstruct should go hand in hand. But few are those who manage to do both. I realized that when I showed this video to many excellent poker players. So if you can, trust me, you will be limitless in poker. Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed the first video. This time we will go straight to the point. How to concretely choose the best combos for your bluffs. I hope you're ready, because at the end of this video, you will be able to choose your bluffs quicker than your outfits. Let's go! Here is the plan of this video. We will start by solving the situation where I challenged you to guess how to choose our combos. I told you there were 3 factors to consider, and we will address these 3 factors one by one. Let's start from where we stopped in the first video. That is to say, the situation where the opponent has shown an ace. As a reminder, you can see in brown all the combos we should value bet. And I decided to hide all the other combos so that we can find the best bluffs ourselves. Using the golden ratio we found in the first video, with the formula bet size divided by bet size plus pot, we know that here we should bluff with 28 combos within our whole strategy. Now, what we didn't see in the first video is how to distribute these 28 combos. To choose our bluffs, there is a metaphor that I love because it works extremely well. It's as if our value hands were making a recruitment campaign. Value hands are looking for great bluff candidates to go along with them. They will take a look at all the CVs of our weak combos and recruit the best ones. But what are they going to look at on these CVs? In fact, only 3 things matter. First thing, the weaker the better. This is due to the fact that the EV of bluffing will be the same for any weak combo we can choose. So the ones who have the lower initial EV are going to be the ones who will benefit the most being chosen. Taking this into account, here I revealed all the combos that have too much equity, and we can observe that the solver didn't choose to bet them. Now, how are we going to decide which combos we will bluff among the remaining combos? In fact, it's simple. You need to look for bluff combos that have cards in common with your value combos. This is the second factor. But why is that? I suggest we look at an example to understand better. On this slide, here is a situation with only 2 value hands. Let's imagine the only combos you bet for value are kings or queens. Now, how do we choose our bluffs? We could take 2 random combos with no equity within our range. So in this case, we could take 7-6 and 7-5. But it would be a mistake. By bluffing these 2 combos, we cannot achieve well our goal, even if we apply the right golden ratio. Remember, our goal is to add as many bluffs as possible in our strategy, as long as the opponent is supposed to fold with his bluff catchers. Until we reach the point where the opponent is indifferent between calling and folding with all his bluff catchers. But here, with this strategy, it cannot work. Even if we apply the right golden ratio, take a look at the opponent's reactions I have displayed on the table at the right. There are some combos against which we achieved our goal. For example, ace-10, ace-9, ace-8, ace-4, ace-3 are all indifferent between calling and folding. But there are also some combos that are not indifferent. For example, if we look at ace-7, ace-5 or ace-6, the opponent has a 7, a 5 or a 6 in his hand, which means that he will block our bluffs. Then he will have an easy fold with these hands, and this means that we are losing some EV because we could add some more bluffs against this part of his range. But careful, because there is another part of his range, which is ace-king and ace-queen, that on the other hand blocks only our value hands. So in the end, we overbluff against a part of the opponent's range, and we underbluff against another part of his range. In this case, it would be pointless to bluff more or to bluff less, because we don't know which combo the opponent has in his hand. So how do we solve our problem? How can we stop underbluffing and overbluffing both at the same time? I'll let you think about it before giving you the answer. In fact, there is a simple trick. Instead of taking random hands in bluff, which are here 7-6 and 7-5, we will take hands that have common cards with our value combos. Our value combos are kings and queens, so we should bluff with king-queen. By doing so, the opponent will be indifferent with ace-7, ace-6 and ace-5 because he will not block either our values or our bluffs. And even with ace-king and ace-queen, he will be indifferent because he will block both our values and our bluffs. So by doing this effort to take common cards between our bluff combos and our value combos, we can manage to accomplish our goal against all the opponent's bluff catchers, so we will never underbluff and we will never overbluff. So this idea of common cards is therefore the second point on the CV. As a little reminder, first point, the equity of your bluffs. Your value hands want to recruit bluffs that have the lowest possible equity. But this is not the only condition. Your value hands also want to recruit bluffs that will go incognito. That is to say, bluffs that will not allow the opponent to have any clues about your value range or your bluffing range. And that goes through making sure you have good common cards between your value range and your bluffing range. Now, the third and least important factor is the blockers. By the way, in our situation, they are completely useless. If you try, for example, to block ace-king, ace-queen and ace-10, your opponent will simply stop calling with these hands because he will also block your bluffs. So he will fold these hands that you try to block and he will call with other bluff catchers. In fact, you should never try to block hands that are bluff catchers. What is interesting if you want to use blockers is to go for blocking hands that are even stronger than your value hands. But still, even if you can find good blockers, it is the least important factor. You should see it as a last optimization to improve your strategy only if you have combos that fit both the first and the second factor. So now we know the 3 points we must consider in the choice of our bluffs. Getting back to our situation, which combos are we going to choose here? It's simple. We're going to take the hands that have the smallest possible equity and we're going to use the second factor, which is to make sure that there are cards in common between our value range and our bluffing range. In our value range, we can see that there are a lot of King X, Queen X, Jack X, 10X, 9X, so we want to take the same cards in our bluffing range. Of course, we won't be able to take any Jack X or 9X because it would make a pair and these combos would have too much equity to be bluffed, but we still have to take some King X, Queen X and 10X. Let's check if it works. Here is the optimal strategy. If you look at all the combos that are chosen in bluff, you can see that they have both very little equity and that they have 1 or 2 cards in common with our value range. For example, if we look at Queen 8, it has common cards with Queen Jack, Queen Queen and Jack 8 that we use as value, so Queen 8 is an excellent combo to bluff. However, a hand like 6-5 seems to be a bad bluff because we don't have a lot of 6 or 5 in our value range. As a better overview, I decided to put in one single board all the combos that are bet in value and all the combos that are bet in bluff. With this view, we can clearly see that the most we have a card in value, the most we also have the same card in bluff. Except of course, the cards that would make a pair. One important thing to notice is that we must consider every card. Indeed, here in our value range there are a lot of King X, Queen X and 10X, so we have to take a lot of them in our bluffing range. But in our value range there is also some 8X, 7X, 6X and 5X cards, so we have to take them a little in our bluffing range as well. Of course, what is important is to respect the ratio with every card, so that whatever cards the opponent has in his hand, he cannot have any clues about our value range or about our bluffing range. So now you know the 3 factors that you have to take into account to choose your bluff combos. Equity, common cards, and blockers. These are the 3 only factors that you have to consider when choosing your bluff combos on the river. And since I know you have been waiting for it, it's now time to look at a real range. to see how everything we have seen so far applies in a global strategy. In this situation, we defended as big blind against an open of hijack 60 blinds deep. The flop runs 9-7-4, we check hijack bet spot, we call. Turn 2, we decide to make a small donk bet and our opponent calls. And river 2, we are out of position, so it's our turn to play. Here, the effective stack is 476k and the pot is 263k. As a small remark before going further, if you don't like the donk bet on the turn, you can go check by yourself, it is one of the main lines. Like in any situation on the river, our golden ratio and factors to consider to choose our bluffs are going to work for each single bet size. But we will not have the time to do it for each one, so we will focus on the most important bet size, the one on which it is the most important to be accurate. That is to say, all-in. Here I have highlighted in green all the value combos for all-in. It makes about 8 combos. Once again, the important thing is not to know how to count precisely the combos. The important thing is to realize the global proportion among your range. So now, to build a good bluffing strategy, the first step is to find the number of combos that we should bet as bluffs for this bet size. All-in is about 180% of the pot here. And we have two methods to find the golden bluffing ratio for this bet. We can use either the formula or the alpha table that I gave you in the first video. Whatever method you choose, you will find about 2/3. And this means that you can take 0.66 combos in bluff for each combo that you bet as value. If we do the quick calculation, it means that in total, we should bet 5 combos as a bluff all-in to go with our 8 value combos. By the way, if these calculations seem a bit hard to you, no worries. I have created a simulator on Deep Dive Poker on which you will be able to train only for the bluffs. You can find it as a feature of this video on Deep Dive Poker, and believe me, using it you will improve extremely fast. So now, how are we going to distribute our 5 bluff combos? As a reminder, 3 factors. The first and most important one is to sort by equity. We want to take the weakest hands possible on this board. Second thing, we will look at the cards in our value range to try and take the same cards in our bluffing range. And finally, third thing, if we still have many candidates left, we can look at the blockers as a final optimization. To be honest, you have to keep in mind the importance of each factor, but actually the 3 work together. It's possible that you prefer to bluff a combo that has more equity than another if it has excellent common cards. But you always have to try to prioritize these 3 factors in this order. For now, I have a challenge for you. Here I took the CVs of 10-6, King-Jack and 6-5, which are 3 weak combos and potential candidates to bluff. Try to find which one of these 3 combos will not be chosen to bluff all-in. 2 of them will be chosen and 1 will not. To help you in your thinking process, I did a little study of each factor for each combo, so you can use it to find your answer. In this situation, the combo that you should not bluff is 6-5. You should not bluff this one because it does not have many good common cards. It still has a 5 which is used in value by 5-2, but we prefer to bluff with 10-5 and Jack-5 as bluffs, so we don't need 6-5. By the way, I expect that a lot of people answered that King-Jack was the combo that we shouldn't bluff in this situation because it has an high equity. I would like to make a small remark about that. Actually, for the first factor, what really matters is not the equity of your hand. What is important is the percentage of the time when your hand will win the pot if it's not bluffing. Let me explain. Imagine you have a hand that has 10% equity on the river. If you are in position and you decide to check back, this means you will earn the pot 10% of the time with this hand. This is pure logic. However, if you are out of position, your opponent will still have an opportunity to play after you if you check, and the 10% of his worst hands, which are the only hands that you beat, he will use them for bluffs. And since your hand is pretty bad, it will not be a good bluff catcher and you will have to fold against a bet. This means that even if you have 10% equity out of position, you will never ever earn the pot with this hand if you decide to check. So what is really important is not the equity of your hand, it is the EV of your hand when you check. So this means the percentage of the time when your hand will win the pot if you check. So that's the real first factor, and what you must remember is that it will be different if you are out of position or in position. This is the reason why, since we are out of position in this situation, we can decide to bluff with King Jack, which has a decent equity, but a much smaller EV to check. On this slide are highlighted in blue all the best bluffing combos for the bet size all-in. Within our bluffing range, we can clearly observe the common cards with our value range. For example, if we take a hand that is bluffed a lot like Queen 10, it has common cards with Queen 2, 10-2 and 10-9, which are three combos that we use for value. Then Queen 10 has great common cards with our value range, and it's a very good combo to bluff all-in. If you want to take a look at all the other bet sizes to see which are the combos we bluff, you will still find that three factors that dictates the best bluffing combos. Yet, you may notice that the smaller the bet size you look, the less these three factors are applied. So why is that? In fact, it's super simple. Remember, it's a global recruitment process. The value hands want to find the best bluffs to go along with them. But sometimes, within the bluffing candidates, there are some absolute stars. Some combos that everyone wants to recruit. And these stars that everyone wants to recruit will always go to the biggest bet sizes. Because these are the most important bet sizes, the ones on which we don't want to make any little mistake. So finally, the star bluffing candidates will all go for the bigger bet sizes, and then the smaller bet sizes will have to pick within the remaining candidates. Just like a real recruitment process. The best companies will have the best candidates, so the worst companies, the ones that nobody wants, will have to pick within the remaining candidates. So as a synthesis, within a global range, if you are looking for the best bluffing combos for a big bet, you will apply the ratio bet size divided by bet size plus pot, and you will distribute it among the best combos using the three factors we have seen. And if you're looking for the best bluffing combos for smaller bet sizes, the process is exactly the same. You have to apply the right ratio and to choose your combos using the three factors, but you also have to remember to leave the star for the bigger bet sizes. What is important is to understand the logic. Starting from here, it's all about training, to be able to, at some point, know intuitively while playing whether you should bluff or not with any combo. Of course, we will also see in the next video how to best exploit any opponent's leaks. Because there is not so much interest in being an amazing bluffer if you are not able to then adapt your decisions to improve your earnings. But before that, what I suggest is to look at concretely how important each factor is compared to the others, to have a deeper understanding about the choice of combos. Welcome to my laboratory. This is where I go each time I need to study a concept in more detail. The concept we want to study today is how to sort the best bluff combos using our three factors. The situation I have chosen is on this slide. You are in position on the river with a 400k effective stack and a 100k pot. Your opponent decided to bet 40k, and what you have on the left is all the combos he can have when he bets. On the right, it's your range. All the combos that you can have and their equities against an opponent's bet. In this situation, we will lock the opponent's strategy. So as long as we are in the laboratory, our opponent will always bet with the hands you can see on the left. However, we will make some little changes within our range to see what happens if we remove or if we add some combos. Let's go! First, let's find the best combos to raise as bluff in the normal situation. So on this slide, you have all the combos that we should raise as value, And now we have to find the best combos to go along with them and raise as bluff. Before I let you think about it, it's important to notice that if there are some weak combos that are sometimes expected to fold, then their equities doesn't matter anymore. If a combo is expected to sometimes fold, it means that its EV is the smallest possible, which means 0. So all these combos, their equities doesn't matter anymore. These are all perfect fits for the first factor. So now I let you think and guess which are the best combos to raise as bluffs. If your strategy is to bluff the weakest possible combos that have either a jack, a 9, a 7, a 6 or a 5, it's a very good answer. These are the combos that we should choose. And I highlighted them in blue, while the green combos are the ones you raise as value. At the right, you can observe the opponent's expected reactions against your raise. So as we could expect, our goal is accomplished because most of his bluff catchers are indifferent between calling and folding, which means that we were able to optimize our bluffing strategy to have a maximum of interesting bluffs against the entire opponent's range. So in the end, it was easy. We only need to take the weakest possible combos that have either a jack, a 9, a 7, a 6 or a 5. But there is still a problem here. We cannot take as bluffs any 10x or 8x because they would have too much equity. And this means that the 10s and the 8s that we raise as value are fragile because we cannot find any good bluff combo to go along with them with good common cards. And we'll see in the next situation that there are some big implications to this. Wait a second. Hello? Hey man, it's Bryson. I love your little experiment. But you're trying to fool me here. You know that we're not taking Jack X, 9x and 6x to have common cards. It's about blocking the opponent's nuts. I've always been taught that way and it's not gonna change today. You haven't proved anything. Well, that's interesting. In the end, do we choose some Jack X, 9x and 6x as bluffs because they have good common cards with our value range? Or do we choose some Jack X, 9x and 6x as bluff because they block the opponent's nuts? To study that, I suggest we dive into the real experience. Here, I removed Jack 9 and 9-6 from our range. So the opponent's range is locked, he still bets with exactly the same hands, but the only difference is now we no longer have Jack 9 and 9-6 within our range. The first thing we can notice is that 10s and 8s are no longer raised as value. This is not my fault. I did not touch anything about these two hands. They still have exactly the same equity as before, so now why are they no longer raised as value? Remember what I said to you right before. These two hands are fragile value hands. This is because we cannot find any good bluffs with good common cards to go along with them. In the previous situation with Jack 9 and 9-6, we managed to fix the problem a little bit because we had a lot of values and a lot of bluffs, so we were able to create a kind of fog. This means that when the opponent had a 10, so for example Jack 10, he couldn't call that easily. For sure, he blocks 10-10 in our range, but he also blocks a lot of bluffs like for example Jack 7, Jack 6 and Jack 5. So we tried to maximize that as much as possible to create a fog and protect our 10s in the middle of our value range and our bluffing range. But here, in this new situation, I removed a big part of our value range. We don't have 9-6 and Jack 9 anymore. This means that our bluffing range is going to be much smaller as well, and if we decide to bet with 10s and 8s now that the fog has disappeared, they are going to be super exposed. The opponent will have super easy clues to decide if he wants to call or not using blockers. So it's better in this situation to not raise anymore with 10s and 8s. So within our value range, we only have two combos now, 7s and 5s. Now what you have to do is to find which are the best bluff combos to go along with them. So if we decided to take some Jack X, 9x and 6x as bluffs because we wanted to block the opponent's nuts, we should still find in this situation some Jack X, 9X and 6X within our bluffing range because the opponent's range hasn't changed at all. So will it be the case, or will our bluffing range change now that we have a different value range? This is the challenge, try to guess. Here is the comparison between the two situations. So on the left, you have the first situation we studied at the beginning, so including Jack 9 and 9-6 within our value range. And on the right, this is the solution to the challenge without Jack 9 and 9-6. Here we can clearly see that most of the Jack 9 and 6X are not taken as bluffs anymore. So it was not a question of blockers. Here, in this new situation, we prefer to take as bluffs the weakest possible combos that have a 7 in it. That is to say, 9-7 and 7-6. So this proves already that we are not bluffing, for instance, with Jack 7, Jack 6 and Jack 5 to block the opponent's nuts, which would be Jack 9. The important thing is to have common cards with our value range. Now that there is no longer any Jack X in our value range, we won't find any more Jack X in our bluffing range either. This is super cool, right? However, you may have noticed that something feels odd in this situation. Here, we don't bluff with any 5x. Yet, we can find very good candidates to bluff with a 5 in it. For example, 6-5, 5-4 or Jack 5. So why does the solver not care about common cards with 5s in his overall strategy? To understand, we must remember where this idea of common cards comes from. Common cards are used to prevent the opponent from having decisions that would be too easy with a part of his range. In this case, since we are not bluffing with any combo which have a 5 in it, the opponent could have a super easy call when he have a combo with a 5, because he only blocks our value hands. But if we take a look at the opponent's range on the right, you can see that he has no combo within his entire range that have a 5 in it. So in this case, since we don't take any common cards for the 5, it means we are under bluffing like crazy if the opponent can have a 5 in his hands, but he's never gonna have a 5 in his hand because he has none within his entire range. So we don't care at all about common cards with the 5. Of course, I've chosen this situation on purpose so that you can understand better. But it will not happen often in real situations. So I would not recommend trying to implement such precise optimizations within your game. Now I have another challenge for you. What would happen in your opinion if I decide to add 7-3 to your range? So now within your range you have one more good bluffing candidate. 7-3 has a very little equity and 7-3 has good common card with 7s. So what should we do? Should we bluff with 7-3 instead of bluffing with 7-6 and 7-9? Or should we reject the CV of 7-3? What would you do? Here is the solution. So on the left you have the range we just saw before without 7-3, and on the right you have the range where 7-3 has been added. We can see that the best strategy is not to consider 7-3 as a bluff, but rather to keep 9-7 and 7-6 instead. This is because of the third factor. This is because of the blockers. This third factor is not so predominant usually, but it can happen that you should consider it when you have many great choices. In this case, we have 3 interesting combos in terms of equity and common cards, which are 7-9, 7-6 and 7-3. And since all 3 are interesting, we will be able to use blockers to choose which one we want to bluff. Here, 7-3 does not have any good blockers, and in reality it even has bad blockers, because it will block a lot of hands in the opponent's range, which are even weaker than our bluffs. On the other hand, 9-7 and 7-6 will block hands that are even better than our value hands, for example 9-6, 6-4 and Jack 9, which is very interesting. So what you can remember is that blockers as the third factor can still be interesting when we have to choose between many great candidates. To conclude on this part, what is important is to take into account our 3 factors. And you have to do it in this order. First, you should consider the equity of your weak hands. Then you have to look for common cards. And finally, you can also use blockers as a last optimization. We will see some more concrete examples very soon. But before that, I have a question for you. In your opinion, is it possible to adapt the choice of your bluff combos to your opponents? Is the optimal sorting going to change according to your opponent's mistakes? To answer this question, let's get back to the logic behind our three factors. Let's start with the second factor, that is to say, the common cards between your bluffing range and your value range. This factor must be used only if your opponents are going to use blockers to decide whether to call or not against your bet. If you're playing against an opponent who doesn't care about blocking your value range or blocking your bluffing range, then you can completely forget about this second factor and focus only on the two others. But you should do this very carefully, because blockers are widely used today. Most of the players you're going to play against already know that they should consider the blockers to decide if they have to call or not. As an obvious example, if there are 3 spades on the board and you decide to bet all in, your opponent will probably know that it's better to have a spade in his hand to make the hero call. So as a conclusion for this second factor, if you are sure that your opponent is not using blockers to decide whether he should call or not, you can forget about it. But be careful, because doing so can easily expose yourself. Now there is another possible adaptation. It's about the third factor. I told you that blockers were important in the choice of our bluffs only against hands that are better than our value range. This is something theoretically correct, but against a real opponent, it can be adapted. If you're 100% sure that your opponent is going to call with whatever combo, which is usually a bluff catcher, then you can also use blockers on this combo even though it's a bluff catcher. So in the end, in real situations, this third factor is important against the calling range of our opponent. In theory, it is not the case, but in real situations, it will work. That's it for these sorting adaptations. Using these two possible tricks, you can use a personalized choice of bluff combos against any opponents. We are getting to the end of this video. But before that, let's go over several examples that I have selected for you. Here is the first example. You can find at the top all the information about what happened in this hand. We arrive out of position on the river, the effective stack is 430k and the pot is 55k. I have highlighted in green the all-in value combos and in blue the all-in bluff combos. The first thing that we can see is that we have our common cards well respected. We value with Queen X, Jack X, 10x and 9x, and we bluff with Queen X, Jack X, 10x and 9x. On the right, as always, I have shown the graph that compares the golden ratio and the concrete proportion used by PioSolver. Once again, and like in every situation, it's a great fit. So why did I show you this example? It is to show you concretely the difference between the choice of combo in position and out of position. I decided to lock our value range, so that's what you can see highlighted in black, and to compare the choice of our bluffing combos in the real situation out of position and in an imaginary situation in position. The only difference between the two will rely on the first factor, which is the EV of our weak combos. If you can remember, when we are in position, the equity of our hands will be transcribed directly in EV if we check. But out of position, it will not be the case because we can be bluffed. However, even considering this, you can see that the difference between the two strategies is not that big. There are still some subtleties. For example, in position, the solver decides to not bluff with King Queen, Queen 10 and Queen 9, which were used as bluffs out of position. But globally, we still have to take the same combos because we still have to be very careful to have common cards within our bluffing range and our value range. This is the reason why we still have to bluff with Queen High sometimes when we are in position to have some good common cards. So what you can remember is the only difference between in position and out of position is that the equity of your weak hands will be more important in position, but globally, the bluffing strategy will be very close. Now, here is another example. This is the board of the challenge we studied in the first video, but I have put a random effective stack, a random pot, and 2 random ranges for you and your opponent. I did that to demonstrate that the method you know will work in any situation. With the golden ratio and the 3 factors to distribute it among the best combos, you will be able to handle all the situations that you can possibly encounter on the river. In fact, even if the global hand makes absolutely no sense, as long as you can, on the river, apply the right bluff ratio and distribute it among the best combos with the 3 factors, you will be able to find the best strategy. So this is the first thing that we can observe on this strategy. But there is a second thing. It concerns the graph on the right with the comparison between the golden ratio and the ratio concretely chosen by PioSolver for each bet size. We can see that for the big bet size, it's a perfect fit. However, for the smaller bet sizes, we can see that there is a little gap. And the reason behind this gap is super interesting. Sometimes it can happen that we cannot find some good common cards between our value range and our bluffing range. And this happens mostly for the smaller bet sizes that have to choose among the remaining bluff candidates that the bigger bet sizes didn't want to pick. So then, if we cannot find some good common cards between our value range and our bluffing range for these bet sizes, it means that the opponent will have some clues when we bet. There will be a part of the opponent's range that will block our bluffs and a part of the opponent's range that will block our values. And this is the reason why we can sometimes observe the tiny differences or gaps on the graph. Let me explain you why these gaps. If you cannot find good common cards between your value range and your bluffing range, it means, as we have seen at the beginning of this video, that you are going to underbluff against a certain part of the opponent range, while you are also overbluffing against another part of the opponent's range. The solver is super smart. He will be able to see which one is the biggest problem. Is it underbluff or is it overbluff? So he compares the two and he solves the biggest problem by decreasing or increasing his bluffing frequency. But by doing so, he also makes the other problem worse. So the EV you can get by doing this little optimization is super thin. What I advise you is to really not consider this optimization and completely forget about it. It is useless both because the EV you can get is super small and also because in fact you won't get any EV at all because no opponent you will encounter will be able to notice that you don't do it to exploit you. So in the end, my advice is to completely forget about it and focus on the golden ratio. And by the way, it's already harded off. That's it for the examples. Now I offer you a little bit of training. I'll see you right away in my simulator. This video comes to an end, but we have been through a lot about the bluff. Do you remember? In the first video, I told you that a good bluff has the same characteristic than a good lie. I think you see a little clearer now on what I mean. The first thing is that you should not lie too often. Well, now you know the golden ratio that gives you the maximum number of bluffs you can have in your overall strategy. And the second thing is that you need to have credible lies. Well, now you also know how to choose credible bluff combos. That is to say, combos that have cards in common with your value range. So what do we have left to see now? What a question! Actually, the program hasn't even started yet. Sizings, traps and many others. We will go through everything. But first, we have to see how to adapt our strategy to earn the maximum possible amount of chips against a real opponent. This includes both finding the mistakes of our opponents and how to exploit them at best. I will share it in the next video, and Deep Dive Poker still has a lot of surprises for you.